Hello, Peppers. This is Pep with Chaz and not Dr. Dave. Definitely not Dr. Dave. Another guest, Indrani Bandyopadhyay. Did I say that right?
You said it very well.
That's good because as someone as Lichadello, I'm used to people massacring my name, so I didn't want to massacre yours.
No, I actually, when I teach at university, at the beginning of term, I usually have a competition with a chocolate prize for students who can get closest to, and it's quite competitive.
Oh, I had the advantage of you telling me directly before this record. Indrani, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us why we're listening to you today.
I don't know why you're listening to me today.
Well, I can tell you why I wanted to, but you tell us about yourself first.
All right, well, you can tell me about that shortly, but who am I? Well, I'm Indrani, and I'm, like Kevin, here to help. But I have, look, I'm a total nerd, very obsessed with knowing the story behind everything. And America features so huge in my life. My academic stuff, I guess, my academic background.
What's your academic stuff?
Is social inquiry,
Yep.
which is a multidisciplinary humanities subject, and my PhD that I'm finishing is in sociology.
Okay.
And I have a background in law as well.
Right.
But, if you take so those are really good tools to help me kind of dismantle and unpack something as complicated as America.
You lectured in law, didn't you?
I do. I do lecture in law.
Yeah.
I do lecture in commercial law as well as corporate governance and
Right, okay.
a couple of other things. But the beast that is America, you know, we've been watching it for years, ever since my earliest consciousness, Brady Bunch. Every show that we ever saw, the Waltons, I think, was my earliest recollection. And I own all the DVDs, by the way. Really, really huge in terms of, impact in our lives.
Yeah.
And we've all read about American exceptionalism. And the weird thing about this particular moment in time is, thanks to someone like Donald Trump, that's being very interestingly unraveled. So we're getting a view of America we've never seen before. And Planet America, which I've been watching for years, and PEP just really enable that to become a massive addiction.
I think we can all agree that.
We're not related, though.
I think we can all agree that our show is fantastic, and so is this podcast. But as the hand of
Unrelated
God,
that they are.
as the hand of God point out, this has nothing to do with Planet America, the TV
Nothing.
show. Even though I am the host of both,
Yes.
no relation whatsoever.
But can I also say that the Facebook page?
Yes.
We've got this amazing little community, and I'm on here because you allow me to rant,
Yeah. Well,
like a serious rant.
this is to answer your question. Why am I interested in hearing what you have to say? The reason why is because Indrani does comment frequently on our Facebook page, and she says intelligent things. And even though politically we're probably not the same.
I think you'd be surprised at how close we are.
Oh, okay. All right.
I
well,
just like to think that, I just have a slight edge of, knowingness.
of correctness.
No, well, you're a science person and I'm a humanities
Yes.
person. So I like to think my humanities degree just gives that slight edge. But
Sure.
we'll be close.
But this podcast is about thinking about detail and research and looking into stuff. And I know from your Facebook comments that you do that. So I thought, you know what? Rather than just getting exactly the same people all the time, because there's this small circle of people who are into American politics, why don't we get someone who's also into American politics, who's also got academic training, but who isn't part of exactly the same group of people? So that is why you are here, because you say intelligent things, and I think you belong.
Well, I definitely feel like I belong now. Thank you very much. But I just had a little thing that I put together. So we've got a lot to talk about today, obviously.
We do.
But the first thing I want to do is to thank you.
Oh, okay.
And, it's not being sucky, but it's like, well, when a guy invites you onto his podcast, you have to thank him, right?
Oh, thank you.
So anyway, so obviously there's the thank you. But what you're doing with PEP, I think it's very similar to what Alexis de Tocqueville discovered about America. So it's kind of very American in spirit. Now, I just sort of wrote this little bit. What he described about America were two very key aspects. One is just this enormous public engagement. What he talked about when he was visiting in the year sort of 18 something, which I've forgotten the year, believe it or not.
That's okay.
But he was visiting and he noticed just constant town halls and conferences and speeches and soapboxes and all that stuff, as well as the most insatiable greed for money that he'd ever seen. So they were the two big aspects of America that he noticed. But yours is the first thing, what you're doing here. I mean, it's one thing to just have a podcast. Everyone has a podcast, you know?
I have noticed that.
Yeah. And I think that show on ABC that sort of spoofed the thing about podcasts, I mean, I think they were pretty spot on. We don't need another crappy podcast, but this is not a crappy podcast.
Oh, thank you very much.
But it's not just the podcast. It's your engagement with the Facebook people as well, not just me, but everybody. And I think that's one of the, because I also used to teach communications and media until my supervisor told me I had to do my PhD, so I stopped teaching. But one of the things that we are starting to notice about the media is, how institutionalized it is. And as you say, the same guests, the same circle, it's a celebrity culture now, and people are doing the same circle, same faces everywhere, so same opinions. But my dream was always exactly what you're doing here, that everyone will talk.
Well,
so thank you.
Well, thank you. And kind words make me extremely uncomfortable. So let's move into to the topics.
Don't worry, I got some Chaz bashing coming up.
Excellent. That will make me much more comfortable. I'm much more used to that. Let's start off talking COVID though, because that's the main topic right now at the moment. We've obviously America is now pushing 45,000 cases a day, which was, it's rising so rapidly. Last Friday, we were recording at 9 a.m. and we had to keep on re-recording because the numbers of cases kept on going up so rapidly. We kept on being out of date, what we were talking about. And it was really shocking just how much the switch has just flipped in the last week and a half. But I want to actually start off, before we talk about America and COVID, I want to talk about a different country which doesn't get spoken about much, and that's Peru.
Yes.
And because a lot of people talk about Brazil with regards to South America, and because Brazil is also a mess in terms of raw numbers of cases, it's right up there with America in the mid 40s, but 40,000s per day. But Peru is right now, it's fifth in the world for cases per capita. Chile's third, America is seventh. Brazil's 12th. Peru's 11th for deaths per capita. USA is 7th, Chile's 10th, Brazil's 12th. But the difference about Peru, because why am I talking about Chile? Chile's worse than Peru. The reason I'm talking about Peru is because unlike Chile, unlike Brazil, unlike America, Peru had a complete lockdown from March the 16th, and it is still going. Peru has had the world's longest lockdown. It is still going. It's due to go at least until the end of July, and it will probably keep on going after that because it's not working. And so this is a really interesting aspect of COVID. We're talking about how to deal with it. Peru's been doing exactly what they say you should do, and it's not working. And there's a few reasons why that people speculate, because it is a very different kind of country. I should say, by the way, their lockdown is a super lockdown. You're only allowed to leave the house to purchase essential goods. That's it.
Right. So
it's a real lockdown.
A bit like India had.
Yeah, it's like it's a full-on lockdown, but it's not working. These are some of the reasons that people speculate. We can't know for sure, obviously. One is only 38% of the people in Peru have bank accounts. Now, what that means, you might go, well, so what? But the government is giving them aid, like in America, like in Australia, like in a lot of other places, but they don't have bank accounts to send them to. So the Peruvians have to line up to get their aid. Those queues are where people catch COVID. Equally, they don't have fridges. 40% don't have fridges. What that means is they need to go to the market every day for food because they can't store any food.
Right. There's
no once a week, once a 2 week thing, once a fortnight thing. It's every day. At the marketplace, people are catching COVID. 70% of Peruvians work in the informal economy, which means there's no working from home when you're in the informal economy. You have very little money. And it's black market, so it's cash. So you need to be out there every day to get more. Otherwise, you're screwed. Also, social distancing is hard when over 15% of the country live in overcrowded houses because there's a lot of poverty.
Yep.
And so once again, all these things add up to, even when you do the right thing in this environment, if you're a poor country, well, in the case of Peru at least, you're screwed. And and they're not getting talked about much. So I just wanted to raise it as something that's worth watching when you're looking at worldometers and you're looking at all the numbers. Just keep an eye out in Peru because
looking at the different sort of living standards and so on in countries to try to work out what the rates are going to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. India's a strange thing as well. Like they've had a long lockdown and it's starting to sort of relax a little bit, but
as it
the
worked,
numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, I was always skeptical. I think that's too big a population for tiny numbers like 2,000 deaths to be realistic.
It's good to look at per capita numbers with countries like India and America.
Yeah, look, I'm probably wrong. What do I know about COVID? Nothing. Zero expertise
We all
about
pretend.
that. But, it just didn't seem to gel.
To move to America, the area that people are talking about with America at the moment today, we're talking about the news of today, it's Anthony Fauci decided to do something which I'm still not sure why. It was in the middle of one of his hearings, and I don't know if he's trying to get fired, if he's just decided he's had enough.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
but he's just come out with the most amazing clip. Hand of God.
We are now having 40,000+ new cases a day. I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around. And so I am very concerned.
Now, I don't know why he decided to put out the number 100,000 cases a day, but that is destined to be all over the news, and it is. What were you about to say?
I got a theory as to why he's suddenly saying these things now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but Mitch McConnell was out there touting masks just yesterday.
Yep.
Everybody wear a mask now.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think this sort of segues a little bit into the Lincoln Project. Like there's a lot of people in America who were sort of supposedly on Trump's side or Trump's party, who are quietly undermining him or noisily undermining him. And I just maybe felt that perhaps Fauci decided to ride that wave, because what's going to happen? What can he do? He can sack him. But if he sacks him, that's the biggest outcry right now, given the numbers going up and up and up.
That is true. This would be a bad time to sack Fauci.
Bad time to sack Fauci. And I feel like, he knows it. And I feel like perhaps the ground under Trump's feet is starting to shift a little bit as well.
It's interesting you raise Mitch McConnell, how he's pro-mask and he's trying to push masks
Today.
at the moment. Yeah,
Well,
today.
yesterday.
Yeah. I don't think I personally don't think that's trying to undermine him. I think it's the opposite. I think Mitch McConnell can see the writing on the wall. He's a smart guy and he's thinking, we need to get Donald Trump support in masks, if only for polling reasons, but leaving that aside, like for the economy, just to like.
I mean, undermining Trump in the sense of they know that Trump's not wearing masks. He's got some rally coming up and they're not going to wear masks there either. So I think perhaps undermining, I meant that, in the sense that Trump's saying not masks and he's saying yes masks.
Yeah, well, I was going to say on that note, I've got a couple more clips here of it's not just Mitch McConnell, it's the entire Fox News stable. They obviously got a memo in the last day or two going, okay, we need to get Trump to support masks because first of all, Hannity of all people came out with this.
I went to my grocery store every week. Guess what? They wore masks. Nobody at my grocery store, thank God, got coronavirus. I think they work. And I said, especially if I wear a mask and it opens up baseball, concerts, NFL football, I'd rather wear the mask and go to the game.
There you go. He's talking Trump's language there, going to the game.
He's talking to Trump now, isn't he?
Yeah, well, hey, you think he's talking to Trump? How about Steve Doocy? Get a load of this. He's just completely cut the middleman and he's just giving Trump direct advice now.
I think that if the president wore one, it would just set a good example. He'd be a good role model. I don't see any downside to the president wearing a mask in public.
So they're not being very subtle about it. They're definitely they're throwing themselves at Trump, just going, wear a mask, or at least support people wearing masks, because that's the thing they're most concerned about. These areas where the spikes are at the moment are mainly southern areas, with the exception of California, and they're worried that those people aren't wearing masks at the moment, which might be part of the problem.
Oh, in Florida, I mean, they need Florida at the election, and it's not looking good in Florida. Look, Ron DeSantis, I am no fan, and you're well aware of that.
Yes.
It's right up there with Brian Kemp in my books, but Florida's a big concern. All the red states are a huge concern. And I agree. I think, and McConnell is actually feeling the sweat right now himself. This is a bad look, and if they don't mask up, they're going to get accused of all sorts of things very soon.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And I can't emphasize enough that Trump needs the economy to come back, and it's not going to come back if people are scared.
Or dead.
Or dead, yes, that's right. Although so far the deaths haven't. It'll be interesting to see whether. See, at the moment we're in this period where we don't know if there's a mountain of deaths around the corner, or if things have changed because they're younger. Because the people who are getting COVID at the moment are 10 to 15 years younger than the people who did get COVID. I mean, you got to remember with the deaths. I think in the New York Times they said this week it was 59,000 off the top of my head. I think it's 59,000 of the 120,000 deaths were in nursing homes. And so once you take them out of the equation, then there aren't so many deaths. And so maybe they have worked out a way to take them out of the equation.
Now.
It's I think it was 127 today in world 130,000.
130.
Yeah,
on
yeah. But that was a week ago, that article. So maybe they've found a way to save the old people, so the old people don't get it, and that is reducing the deaths permanently. Maybe not. Maybe in a week's time, the fact I just said that is going to look really stupid because the deaths will go through the roof.
Your guess is as good as anyone's right now. I mean, I think Fauci is probably saying, I don't necessarily think he's overstating it. From where he's standing, it looks so bad. Who would have thought America, of all places, would be the world's worst kind of COVID deaths?
Oh, sorry. Just queuing up a sting there.
Go ahead. No. By the way, I like the little.
You like the little
good job.
stings?
Yeah, nice.
Well, right, good.
And also, I was going to say, I'm not a stats person. I'm a qualitative person. So you go ahead. I have no stats.
Well, you'll be surprised to hear I have
Stats Nugget.
I love the siren. I love the siren so much.
I feel like we should be dancing on the inside.
There's got a few more to come. We'll be dancing by the end. It's on Fauci though, on this topic, which is the experts and whether the experts should be sacked or otherwise. This is an amazing poll. This is from the New York Times survey, their big survey last week, the one with 1 trillion people.
Yep, everybody.
The A+ 538 poll. They said 84% of voters say they trust medical scientists to provide reliable information about the virus. Fair enough. 90% of Democrats, 75% of Republicans, okay, trusting medical scientists. That's not a surprise. 51% of Republicans are trusting Fauci these days, which is a lot less than it used to be.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it used to be in the 80s. So he's lost a bit of sheen. I'm not exactly sure why. I think he became a slightly more partisan figure in the last few weeks. 81% of Democrats still trust him. But this is the number. This is the stats nugget for you. I'll get you to guess. I like these guessing competitions.
Yeah,
Guess the percentage of Republicans who say they trust the national news media to provide accurate information about the virus.
30?
7%. 7%. I would have guessed about 30 as well.
No. I was like, is it 30? Trump? No. Is that
7%.
Is that? But are they Fox watchers? Or
no, they're Republicans.
The national media, as in Fox News watchers, or
what
are they? What is the national media?
I'm pretty sure the 7% of Republicans, the 93% of Republicans are trashing the national news media. I'm pretty sure they're not talking about Fox. Yeah. I'm pretty sure they're talking about New York Times and CBS and all them. But anyway,
look, they wouldn't be totally wrong. I mean, American media is hard to take, to be honest.
Another thing I've noticed,
and I'm not a Republican. I don't want to hear any left-right.
No. This
is just for the peppers. Please don't complain about that.
Oh, well, yeah. Our commenters do like to point out that that me and John probably aren't as conservative as some of them. Although, there was a time when I would have been a Republican voter because I'm slightly on the right. I'm a libertarian who's got some. I'm very unorthodox. I'm all over the place. But
well, this is where we could have talked about. Are you really a libertarian? Because I think you are a bit of a purist. So I feel like as a purist, you're probably a classical anarchist.
Okay. You think I might be an anarchist?
Yeah, not in the punk anarchist way. I mean, maybe a little bit
That's a shame.
of that.
They're cool.
I know, but no, maybe a little bit of that. But I meant in the highest order of human society type of anarchist, which is totally self-regulated.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I think we're in rather a Hobbesian hell because I don't think enough people can self-regulate.
Yeah, look.
I'm not sure they can be regulated with the law either. So I don't know. We have to figure something.
I think I'm definitely a self-regulator, but I'm not sure I expect other people to be quite as self-regulating as I am.
That's kind of what libertarians need, like for it to work. You have to.
Yeah, well, I mean,
don't you? To a point.
Look, if you're going to be a pure libertarian, then yes, but as anyone who follows me closely would know, I'm all over the place. I've got this weird pragmatic streak which completely conflicts with my libertarian tendencies. So to just create a mess. I think I'm hard to describe because I'm completely contradictory, and I'm aware of that.
Look, you don't have to apologize to me or explain too much because I'm completely flaky myself. I've been a member of the Liberal Party and a member of the Labor Party, not at the same time.
Well, that would be contradictory.
That would be illegal in one of those parties. But and my students when I used to teach politics, used to ask me, what is your political philosophy? Mine is general benevolence. Any policy that supports general benevolence, I'm for.
That's it. That sounds hard to argue with.
General benevolence party.
That's fair.
Which makes it very difficult come election times or in terms of trying to determine are we left or right, because I am neither.
I wouldn't be surprised if on the Senate tablecloth somewhere there is a general benevolence party.
I
would
feel
not
like
be
there
surprised.
needs to be one.
I'll just point out two more things about COVID before we just move on to different topics. One thing which we've been talking a lot about on the show is testing numbers, and in particular the percentage of tests that come back positive, because that seems to be a key indicator to how screwed you are as a state or country when that goes above 10%. But the thing which I think it's really underplayed, I feel, and I don't think we talk about this enough with America, is the effect of health insurance on those numbers.
Gosh, yes.
Because people pay a lot for those tests. They still do, despite the fact it's supposed to be free. Like I distinctly remember talking about all the bills they passed 2 months ago where they were supposed to be free.
Who's the guy who got an $18 million bill or whatever it was from the hospital for was it 18 million?
It was 1.3 million.
1.3.
But that's enough.
Okay, well that's plenty. Because who earns that?
Yeah, that is enough. That is enough. Well, I was going to talk about it's not so much about the health insurance in terms of treatment, because when you're sick, you don't have much choice. I'm talking about when you got a symptom. Do you get tested or not?
Oh, yeah, that as
right?
well.
Because that will make a big difference. And there was a New York Times piece just this week, which I'll put a link to, but it's probably going to be paywalled, where two people got corona tests at the same place in Austin. It's the same hospital, right? The emergency room where they got the test, they gave them the option of paying for paying on their insurance or paying in cash.
Yep.
One of them opted to pay in cash. They got charged $199. The other opted to pay with their insurance. They just gave them their insurance card. When they got the bill was for $6,408. The health insurer negotiated the total down to $1,100. The plan said that his health insurance plan said, her health insurance plan said that she was responsible for $928 of that. So the person with insurance was on the hook for $928 of cash. The person who paid in cash was just charged $200. And that's the same hospital.
Yeah, look, this
So-
is. I mean, I think I'd love to see a PEP.
So why would you get a test?
No, well, that's
Yeah.
absolutely right. But
Yeah.
I'd love to see a PEP sort of dedicated to the American health system because it's so. I know you guys have done it, discussed
bits
it
and pieces,
in bits and
but yeah.
pieces,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it'd be good to really pull it apart, including a proper. Which you've also done in bits and pieces, like really pull apart Obamacare, from a policy perspective. Because, I mean, health insurance along with guns are two things I don't understand about America. Like guns is fun, to shoot, I'm sure. Like I've done it, Who doesn't go to the little duck shooting gallery at the whatever?
Whenever there's a protest, I pull out my
Not
semi-automatic
the
rifle.
real, not live ducks. I mean, those little funny little whatever they're called, the shooting gallery. That's
Sure.
it. So I'm going to get into trouble. The shooting gallery at
I know the
Luna
one.
Park or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, look, that's all great, but in the other type, the non-self-regulated type, is the problem, and this bizarre sort of freedom essentialism that they've tied to health
Yeah.
insurance and
Yeah.
medicine costs. Do you think they will change their approach to Obamacare? Because I know a lot of Republican voters, especially the poorer Republican voters, have been kind of moving towards liking
Do I think Republicans will change their view?
because they're the ones who are in the way of it at the moment.
I think that if healthcare stood still, then maybe, but it's not going to stand still. If Joe Biden wins the presidency, they're going to change the healthcare system again.
Right.
And I'm sure Republicans will get just as up in arms about the next system.
Is it
as
a
they were the
political
last
thing
one.
or is it actually about the policy, or is it because, and I think maybe this is more correct, the underlying sort of support of the big pharma or the big healthcare companies, private insurers
I can't read
and the
people.
lobbyists?
I can't read people's minds about why they're upset or not. But I mean, you're right. Healthcare really does need an hour to go into because it's so complicated.
least,
but
yeah.
but the bottom line is for me that regardless of politics, even living under Obamacare is still shit.
It's bad.
Like the deductions, the deductibles they have to pay are ridiculous. Thousands and thousands of dollars before they get anything back from their health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you simply cannot afford
No.
to pay for healthcare, even with insurance. And this is a great example I just described.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to see if someone isn't charitably disposed towards something because they're from the other party and their healthcare sucks,
Mm-hmm.
then they're going to blame that bill for
Exactly.
it. Yeah, and so it's not an irrational thing for Republicans to just be hell bent on ending Obamacare. What's irrational is to not have a replacement. That's the problem. But having said that, I don't blame them for not having a replacement because it's not easy. Like I've read so many articles where they say that this is the problem with healthcare in America, and they go, no, this is the problem. But it seems to be 7 or 8 massive problems all at once. The whole system seems to have evolved in the worst possible way for 50 years, and it's just been left running.
Yep.
And now trying to clean it up is just a mess.
Yeah, the aspect that I find most unfair is to tie it to your employment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard on employers.
Yeah.
And, having a job shouldn't have anything to do with whether you have healthcare or not.
Totally.
So that would be a good thing to decouple.
It makes people stay in their jobs long after they want to move on. And you know what that means?
Very poor for productivity.
That means lower wages as well.
Right,
Because
okay, I didn't
because
hear
the
that.
because the employer has the whip handle because you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
leave.
No, that's true.
So they can screw you
Yep,
on
yep.
wages.
Yeah, so you have really almost no negotiating power.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, yeah, well, we should do that. You're absolutely right. But
you
anyway,
should.
but this is one more example on how it affects it. The other thing I wanted to say was that on COVID is that there are an increasing number of lame solutions being proposed because there are no easy solutions at the moment in America. And so the lame solutions are proliferating. And I just want to cite a couple of quick ones. Number one, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut are ironically now establishing their own little quarantine when the rest of America was trying to quarantine from New York and New Jersey 2 months ago. Now they're trying to quarantine from everyone else. And if you think about it for 1 second, this is really stupid because number one, okay, that's fine for an airport, but what if someone drives into the state? How are you going to quarantine them? Secondly, how are you going to know that they've been quarantined or not?
I don't know if you've heard the news in New South Wales at the moment, but we're about to do that for Victorians.
Really?
Yeah, the Uber driver was telling me.
I don't know how that's going to work
And
unless
there's apparently people are stacking up against the, at the border at the moment, driving in because there was a 30-hour gap between the law being enforced or coming into effect.
it's probably
rather.
it's probably a bit easier in Australia because there are only so many ways you can drive interstate. Like it's not like the roads are everywhere.
No.
But in America, around New York, there are roads everywhere.
Yes.
So it's a little bit more difficult. But anyway, another one, which there seemed to be a proliferation in America of temperature screens all of a sudden. And that is just so dumb. I saw a study the other day about this where 70% of patients who are sick enough to be hospitalized don't have a fever. Now, that's ignoring the people who are asymptomatic, which is obviously most of the people as well, that don't have any symptoms at all. So at the very least, you are missing 86% of infected individuals if you're using a thermometer to test whether they can enter or not. So it's just completely pointless. Anyway, it's a security theater, essentially.
Yeah, but, one of the biggest problems about COVID is we don't even know enough, to know how to even approach.
Yeah.
Who should we be approaching? It's a bad one. I mean, that's all I can say. It's very, very, I'm not saying anything useful here, and everybody knows that. But it's like it is one of those rare moments in time, I think, where we really don't know what we're doing.
No, we really don't know
really
what we're
don't
doing. And just the number of times when you read a study and then a week later you read a contradictory study and you just go, well,
yeah,
this is what happens when you have a novel, what they call it, a novel virus, a novel
strain.
That's
right. And it's only going to get worse because the permafrost is melting. The old ancient pathogens.
Did you hear what the temperature was in Siberia last week?
I did. Yes,
45 degrees.
Yes, and this is a massive
45 degrees.
Yep. You know what? Give it a couple of massive problem. We think COVID's bad. My friends. It's coming.
On that note, I'm not going to try and cue up the stats nugget to theme again. But on that note, as of May 20,
Stats Nugget.
Thank you, hand of God. As of May 20, the Trump administration had revoked, repealed, or weakened 66 environmental rules. I'll just throw that out there when we're talking about the 45 degrees that Siberia is at the moment.
Yes, but
anyway.
Well, wasn't that one of his first moves to allow toxic waste dumping in rivers?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not understanding. I see it from an industrialist's point of view, but we are not in the Industrial Revolution. We learned a few things from the Industrial Revolution about our immediate environment, and one of those things was try not to totally poison the place that you live in.
Yeah, that was a lesson I thought we'd learned.
Yes, so I'm not sure why this is still a Republican, Democrat, Trump versus everybody else kind of an issue now.
Yeah, I feel like often with Trump, you need to ask yourself, does this somehow play into the culture war? Because that's where he's most comfortable, in the culture war. And maybe, I'm not sure, the environment. So you can see polls where Republicans are really into environmentalism as well. Like they're not so much into climate change science, but in terms of pollution and clean air and clean water, they're into it as much as Democrats are. So it's strange.
And one of the most conservative of all, families in the world, the royal family of Britain.
They're pretty conservative.
Massively fair. Into environmental protections.
Yeah, that's true.
And in fact, I had a massive argument with somebody once who was like I'm sorry to say I'm kind of pro-monarchist a little bit, but I have... Well, I have a very strong reason for that, which is I don't trust governments enough. I just like a check on the governments. We've seen plenty of, that they do anything, but they're kind of there and they might do something at some time in future.
That was the exact argument of the referendum, the monarchist argument in the referendum in 1999, saying, do you trust politicians? Like, at least the royal family are more trustworthy than politicians.
Well, I'm kind of glad that they have all the land that they have because, that's untouchable. There's going to be at least one sort of chunk of land in Britain at least, not anywhere else.
Sure.
Empire is gone. But, one chunk of land at least in Britain that's not going to be developed, it's not going to be touched.
That's a great relief. Let's
All right, moving on.
Let's move on to
Gosh,
2020.
This goes around,
Oh
doesn't
yeah,
it?
it does. It does. Let's move on to 2020. I'll keep moving on. Now, well, something which we were talking about off air, which I'd like to introduce in on air, is when we talk about 2020, is a lot of the advertising. We've been talking about this for weeks on the show about the Lincoln Project
The Lincoln Project.
This war against to just get inside Trump's head. I'm not sure it's a great idea to have as your sole point to rattle the president.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's great for America to have the president being rattled for 6 months. But
Well, the thing it's starting to give me the heebie-jeebies, the Lincoln Project.
Go on,
To be very frank, I mean, look, I have enjoyed George Conway's hijinks.
they are best
and-
described as hijinks.
Yeah, and I've got an odd theory about why Kellyanne does what she does.
What's your theory?
Works for Trump and just really just says the most outrageous lies, untruths, blank-faced. And then George, on the other hand, tries to make it all good by going anti-Trump. I actually think Kellyanne's situation is a sort of odd kind of libertarian feminist sort of a thing. That's her business. This is what she does for a living. And regardless of the politics of anybody,
she's a professional.
this is what she does. You may not like it, but you're like, who's going to say no to the president? It would be a career bad move.
And
bad
to be
career
honest,
move.
I like having professionals in the White House. There aren't
I
as
wish-
many as there should be.
I wish I wouldn't lie, but for the president. But
Well, that's her job.
That's well, she's the voice box, I guess, but the mouthpiece of the president, and that's what she does. So I don't sort of have a concern about that. What I do have a concern about is where are all these people? Way back when, like when. Oh, goodness, let's go back to George W. Bush. Let's go, when Trump was being elected as well, like even like not that far back as George W. Bush. They were all very pro-Trump. I mean, George Conway was at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, everyone's very close and happy. And everybody knew what Trump believed in. There was never any doubt as to what Trump believed in. And now suddenly, and I'm picking on George Conway because he's the face of it a lot. The Lincoln Project themselves, we don't know who they are. They just sort of change around. But I know Conway's a big part of it.
Yep.
So he's catching it, on behalf of. But where were they all when Trump was, being elected? Everybody knew where he stood on everything. And the one thing about Trump is he's not changed. He's very consistent.
Well, to be fair, I mean, George Conway has changed his mind, that's for
A
sure.
lot.
Yeah, but to be fair, some of those guys, I'm trying to remember their names. What's the bald guy who was on MSNBC? No, not Steve Schmidt. He's a different bald guy. But he's involved as well. The guy with the glasses who's extremely obnoxious and he's always on MSNBC. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I see him on Twitter all the time.
Yeah,
Deeply obnoxious.
Yeah, he's been pretty much anti-Trump from the beginning.
Yes.
Like, so he's been there from the beginning. Steve Schmidt also has been there from the beginning. Trust John Schmidt to immediately think of Steve Schmidt. But anyway, so they're not all Johnny-come-latelys in that regard. But I suppose if I was going to defend them, what I would say is that the people have changed their mind. Let's leave aside George Conway for a second, but just general never-Trumpers who are late to the party. I'd say I can understand how someone could have thought Trump was bluffing a bit to con the rubes to win an election, and then thought, oh yeah, but when he's actually president, he'll be competent. And they might have been somewhat disappointed with the results.
Well, either they weren't paying attention or they're really actually brain dead because, that was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But my bigger question, even regardless of, Trump, was what do they think Trump has done that, Newt Gingrich didn't do worse, I just think, from the time that Gingrich really became speaker, things went downhill fast, for American democracy. I think it was terrible for American democracy. What have they achieved beyond, rejigging racial politics? Now they're saying Trump's a racist, but, the things that Obama had to put up with, and we'll be talking about some of this later, but, people's like, oh, black people don't get educated and black people don't do this and black people don't do that. Well, Obama was educated. He was absolutely everything. He was Mr. Clean and articulate, according to Joe Biden. where was everybody? I didn't see any of these never Trumpers or, rush out to defend him at the time or say, hey, no, great. No, they formed a Tea Party, right? And it was just racial vilification was enormous. So where were they is my question. I'm saying that's nice that you want to rattle this guy because he is a loose cannon. But it's not like your party platforms change that much.
I would say that I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say the party platform hasn't changed much. I mean, there are some things where Donald Trump has different policies, like he's
Russia.
Well, I was thinking protectionist, like for instance, like that,
Yeah, a little bit of that.
like Republicans were very not at all protectionist until Trump came along. But having said that, Russia is definitely one as well.
It's a big sticking point, isn't it?
Yeah, but I do think that there is a quantifiable difference between the Tea Party situation where you had some obvious racists amongst the throng, like amongst the protesters, like there were some famous racist signs being held up, but that the people who were in charge and who were leading them were dog whistling perhaps, but not overtly racist. They were talking
What
about
difference does it make, though?
Well-
It's what difference does it make?
Well-
It's kind of worse in a way. I'd rather have someone who's openly racist that I know, where they stand, than someone who's all, like, oh, I'm not really racist, but
that's fine.
I'm going to whip up the frenzy.
That's fine. I think that what you're saying is very logical, but I'm saying it is different. It is different to have someone who is flat out saying a Mexican judge cannot judge me because he is going to. Oh, sorry. A judge with Mexican background who is American cannot judge me because he's going to be biased because of his Mexican heritage. That's a very different thing
I'll give
to
it to
the
you.
kind
Trump's
of thing.
not subtle,
he's
but
definitely not
it's
subtle.
not subtle. But there is something deeply insidious, in my humble opinion,
Sure.
about the sort of subtlety of the racism that we've seen prior to Trump.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, as fun as it is and as necessary as it is, because I think Trump is quite devastating for America. I don't think he does anything for the country, anything good, not anymore anyway. Where were they all?
Yeah.
This is my point. So, I can't really get with the vibe.
No, that's fair. I mean, like I said, my
Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm a bit too cynical about them.
no, that's fair.
Deeply
enough.
skeptical.
I continue to think, like, I know Democrats aren't expecting much from Trump in the next 6 months, and certainly the Lincoln Project aren't expecting much from Trump in the next 6 months. But he's still going to be president.
I think he's
And
stymied due to COVID.
I think that's probably true. I think that's probably true. But I just feel like they know that Donald Trump is watching like they book their ads only on Washington Fox TV on purpose to get at Trump, right? So they know they're getting inside his head. And yes, that may well improve Biden's chance of being elected because he might be off his game and make more mistakes as a result of them being inside his head.
But I don't think it's
I'm not sure that's a great thing.
I don't think it's just for Trump. I mean, I think it's definitely, aimed at Trump. But it feels to me a bit like a coded, like Republican thing. There seems to be this wave going on, and the feeling I get, it's very difficult to, I mean, look, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that, people like Conway are actively undermining the president in the sense that, he himself, he's donating to all of every person who's a Democrat in any seat that he's that's a pro-Trump seat.
Yeah.
So that's active. Look, I don't know what to tell you about this. I think it's necessary because I think he's very destructive, but I don't necessarily know what benefit they think they're going to get from replacing Trump with another Republican. Like, are they suddenly going to, stop being racist? And are they suddenly... Maybe they are in a way. Maybe they'll get a few more black people, but then some of the black Republicans as well are heavily criticized by other black members of the community for, taking a kind of too self-deprecating stance, not demanding their rights?
I think that a lot of people focus on Trump's racism because, well, it's there.
Well, he's there. It's there.
There, but I think for a lot of, well, I'm not going to speak for other people, but I think that there is an argument to be made that the most concerning aspect of Trump is the fact that he is often not rational,
Yes.
and that as a president, that's a worry that the person is flipping around from not consistent. One day saying one thing, next day saying the other thing, and so forth. And so like when we're comparing Trump to other Republicans and saying, well, there's racism everywhere in the Republican Party. Like I think if you replace Trump with Mitch McConnell or something, you would get you wouldn't get a lot of fun. But what you would get is you would get extreme rationality at the very least.
Yeah, well, you probably
And
wouldn't
that would be better, I feel.
Yeah, look, I can see where bringing somebody else in, anybody else, would be at least the allies, internationally, it would be an improvement. I think Trump's caused a lot of damage internationally, and I think he's really caused the United States to lose its place in the world. Who takes America seriously right now? And I think in the vacuum...
That can change, though. I mean,
but
we were saying the same thing about Bush.
Look, it can change. Bush, people just thought he was a bit silly and a bit vacuous, but I don't think it necessarily reflected on United States itself.
No, I know. All I'm saying is that I think back in 2006, 2007, there was a real vibe of, oh my God, what a moron is George Bush. No one's going to respect America ever again. And then 2 years later, Obama and everyone loves America.
But Bush didn't throw out his allies, I mean, he made friends with Howard,
Yeah,
whereas
yeah.
Trump, gave Turnbull an earful, and I don't know what he says to Scott Morrison.
Sure. I want to throw a poll at you. This is my favorite poll of the week. Well, not because I think it's wonderful, but I just find it really interesting. This is a Fox poll from last week, actually. This is a poll where Biden was ahead by 49-40 in Florida, 45-44 in Texas, 47-45 in North Carolina. You might have heard about this poll.
Yep.
The interesting thing is, in that poll, where Biden was ahead 47-45 in Texas, John Cornyn, who is a senator in Texas, was up by double digits in the same poll. And Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, had a 63% approval rating in the same poll. And Trump himself had a 50% approval rating in the poll where he was down by 2 points against Biden.
So, what are you saying? What do you make of it?
There are 5% of people who approve of Trump who are voting for Biden in that poll.
Yeah, I think this is the Lincoln Project effect. It's going to happen.
But they approve of Trump. They approve of him.
Yeah, well, Biden is kind of like Trump, but and this is actually a good moment to segue into. Like, I had a tiny little thing to say about Biden owning his senior status because he wrote this tweet where he talked about Trump as being childish. It's like a child. He expects coronavirus to go away.
Yeah, that was a good quote from him, actually.
And I thought that's actually they've been struggling to define Biden. Sort of in contrast to Trump, and I think that's actually they've hit it. And I don't know if they know that because he's never done that again. But that's, I think, if I was the strategist, I would say push that one.
So you're thinking Biden should be talking about Trump's immaturity?
Absolutely. They're both the same age, roughly.
Yeah.
They're both sort of strange, in terms of their cognitive abilities.
Yes. They've both got their issues.
They definitely have their issues.
Yes.
And I would, say that they're not dissimilar in character, perhaps even belief systems. It's Biden is the one who made the quote, the famous Obama quote that I actually bought the T-shirt for. He's clean and articulate.
Yeah.
I mean, like, seriously, what, mate?
Yeah.
But, I don't think they're that dissimilar. But one is coherent, understands policy, understands government, is, really gets the institution, and oddly statesmanlike, regardless of his sort of downsides or his difficulties. Trump, on the other hand, he cannot get on with others. And I think that's the big difference, is that Biden can get on with people and Trump can't get on with people. And I think it may be another reason that the Lincoln Project people are really stepping on it, on the gas, is because Trump just keeps sacking everyone. The thing he's doing with the generals, so you don't want to get the military offside.
Yeah, that.
I mean, thinking of Indira Gandhi and what happened to her with her own, just from a safety perspective, you don't want to get the military offside. You don't want to get the Secret Service offside, because they're physically protecting you, if nothing else.
You don't want to get them sick with COVID either.
Anything. You don't want to. You just want to look after them as a leader.
Yeah.
Because when I say that, I mean Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own bodyguards. Who were there. So there's always that reality.
Just in case
isn't there?
people don't know what I'm talking about, after the last Oklahoma rally, half of Trump's Secret Service people had to go into quarantine because there was a COVID scare amongst the Secret Service. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think he's treading dangerous ground, and I think that's probably so. Two things: one is that Biden can get on with people, and two, that he's not childish.
I do think you asked why I thought 5% of people were approving of Trump but supporting Biden. I do think there's a certain sector of the community that just, even though they actually like Trump, are just sick of it.
Yeah,
They're just
the
like
drama.
they're just sick of the
It's a
drama.
circus.
They're sick of the drama, and most of people who are sick of it who are Trump supporters would presumably blame the media and blame the left, but there would be that small percentage that go, oh, you know what? It's probably the left's fault. It's probably the media's fault.
yep.
But look, let's just end this.
still-
Let's just end this. Let's just move on.
Yep.
And Biden is a non-threatening presence. Of all the Democrats, if you're going to have a circuit breaker, of all the Democrats, if you're a Republican, Biden is the one. Because you think, okay, number one, he's as moderate as we're going to get from a Democrat. Secondly, he's probably going to do nothing. He's probably just going to sit there. And thirdly, he seems to be the only Democrat who still believes in reaching across the aisle. So if you're going to have a Democrat,
Jeff
he's
Koons,
the one.
Jeff Koons.
Chris Coons.
Chris Koons.
Yeah, Chris Coons. Yeah. Although even Chris Coons is talking about getting rid of the filibuster now.
Yes, but he's
Which is
still
amazing.
reaching across the aisle
He
to do
is.
it.
He
You know,
is.
I really like him. I thought, I think a whole group of these senators who came out in the Kavanaugh hearings was the first time I really paid any attention to these people, and I thought it was very interesting to see some of them, because I thought they were very impressive people. I was actually surprised at how many impressive people there are in the American political system, because we tend to just cartoonize everybody.
I agree.
But, there are really some serious talent there.
Yeah, when I was a kid, sorry to interrupt.
No, you go. Talk about it.
No, I was going to say, when I was a kid, when I don't talk about my history of being into American politics much, because I don't think people care about me.
Tell us about your American politics. Well, it wouldn't be a terrible question to answer.
But yeah, well, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but what I will say is that when I first started, it was about the turn of the decade between the 80s and the 90s, when I was like 12. And the NBC Today show used to be on at like 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
And Meet the Press was on at 11 o'clock at night once a week on Monday morning, our time. And I was just, as a year 7 kid, I'd be watching that. And because I stopped really late watching TV, that's another story altogether. And I was just amazed by how competent the politicians were.
Right.
And that's what first made me fall in love with American politics. Just how super competent, even the bad guys, and everyone was competent, and even though they spoke in really simplistic language, it was clever simplistic language. It was, these simple nuggets were hiding a real complexity, which I appreciated. And I just thought, wow, these guys are just so good at what they do.
And I think that's why we could even, we bought The West Wing. I went back and rewatched it. I think I've watched it about 37 times, the whole thing. But I rewatched it a few weeks ago. And it's really sexist now. I mean, wow, very, very sexist. But still, they're all educated, they're competent, they know what they're doing, and they're trying hard to achieve something. And that's kind of the vibe I get when I do look at a lot of Washington politics. It's not as bad as, the presidential circus.
Yeah, and I do think that there are still those talented people. There are certainly people who aren't great, but there are still heaps of super competent people now, and I think there is hope. I really do. I want to get on to talking about race stuff.
Let's do that. But,
yeah,
just before we get onto race, you reminded me of, my real first collision with America.
yeah.
The Justice League when I was a kid, the cartoons,
Yeah.
Saturday morning cartoons, the League of Justice as it used to be called,
Yes.
Batman, Batgirl. Oh my God, I used to go to the show, because I grew up in Melbourne, so the Melbourne show, and I remember they didn't have Batgirl show bags, so I bought a Batman show bag and just, it was Batgirl.
Do any of the politicians today remind you of Batman or Batgirl?
No. No, none of them. Yeah. But, maybe some of those, a few of those senators. They're not too bad.
They tried to make a superhero out of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They made a cartoon.
No, it doesn't do it for me. Doesn't do it for me. I wish she did, but she doesn't.
That's okay.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Race, goodness, so this was one of the big things. And I think this really probably came about where I think I made a comment, you were sort of talking about two white guys talking about race and you're feeling uncomfortable. Yeah. Well, my view on that is that shouldn't make anyone feel uncomfortable because two white guys should be talking about race, first of all, because, the racial problem. And again, before I get into that, you know what I'm going to say, but I don't want to say that without, really giving a good context for race. So again, just to I don't know if I've said that already, but I come from, a very sort of old, upper caste Indian family, and some of the right-wing fascists that Dr. Dave talks about, the Hindu fascists, are in fact one or two of my cousins.
Okay.
Yeah, who I'd love to cancel. But as I said, can't cancel because if you know anything about Indian families, not possible to cancel. But, so it's very complex. So just me having some pigmentation, isn't necessarily something that gives me an open door about talking about race either.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story about that, which is that I was talking to my daughter about, who I also don't talk much about because I don't like to get my family involved. But every night I talk to my daughter about American politics because she's into that stuff, and she's 10. And I was talking to her about discrimination against various minorities.
Yep.
And we were speaking at cross purposes for a little while there, and I was trying to work out why where we weren't understanding each other. I suddenly realized that she thinks of people from Asian background as white.
Oh wow, that's fascinating.
And and it hadn't even occurred to her that anyone could see people from an Asian background as disadvantaged in any way or as a minority or whatever.
Right.
Because in her school, and she goes to a very posh private school, the majority of people are from Asian background, literally the majority. And and she, when she thinks of racial minorities, she thinks of Indigenous people or whatever. She doesn't think of either Asian people or Indian people.
Well, I've got a book recommendation for your daughter.
Yes.
White Nation by Ghassan Haj. I think Dr. Dave actually mentioned him a couple of weeks ago. But it's not so much about who goes to the private schools or who's in the upper echelons of business, but look at your political chambers. So who walks the halls of power?
Yeah.
That's the real question here, isn't it? And I remember when I was doing my master's degree with actually the man who is my supervisor currently, James Goodman. And I'm just mentioning, shout out, because he was such a great teacher. But
Good stuff, James.
Good stuff, James. But I remember crying in class that day because it was, learning about. See, this is why I'm such a devotee of humanities. Doesn't matter if they double the fee. Take up humanities, kids, because you use it every day of your life, this degree. But it was the first time that I had considered it, this idea of, okay, well, it's yes, because I went to a private school, very posh private school in Melbourne. I come from this, family, and I have never seen myself as disadvantaged. And yet, and in Australia, I've experienced very little actual racism. And I came to Australia when I was 3. So the thing for me is and yet I never felt part of it. And yet I've never been really made to feel part of Australian culture. Now, why is that? And I think the reality is what, the stuff that Haj was talking about, who walks the halls of power. And, Australia really has a long way to go in terms of gender as well as culture. And we're going to get into a little bit of that, a bit later on, very shortly.
Yeah.
As to why that might be the case. And I know this is an American politics show, but there's been crossovers with the Black Lives Matter protests in Australia, Black Lives Australia. So I think there's some crossover. But since I am here and we are going to talk about race, I really feel like the reason that I sort of started to talk about Australian politics and race in Australia is because I had immersed myself having looked at these Black Lives Matter protests in America, and I felt very emotional about them, thought, wow, this is just amazing. And I couldn't work out, why the situation was still so bad with Black people in America. Why are they being targeted? And I know they are. It's not a figment of anyone's imagination. To watch people being murdered on camera by police who don't care, that they know it's going to go viral and they don't care. Is just astonishing. So I went and immersed myself in the history of slavery and Black history. So another thing that I just want to just sort of let people know, I'm not an expert in this area. I'm an observer, and but I'm an obsessive kind of an observer. I used to go and read everything about it, watch everything. So I've been just watching documentaries and reading, cases and so much stuff. And one of the things I noticed and I came away with is that the construction of racism in America is quite different to the construction of race in Australia. The application of racism in America was different to the application of race in Australia. And also that, but there are some crossovers and some of the racism in Australia is quite hidden. And we're going to talk about that soon as well. I'll let you go.
I want to first of all, I do want to ask you about the history that you looked into, but before I do that, I just wanted to just pick up on something you said a little back about not feeling discriminated against, but just not feeling part of because I've got a strange relationship to race in Australia, because at the time I grew up in the early 80s and in the mid 80s, being Italian was different.
It was. And
I was not discriminated heavily against at the same time, but I also did not feel part of any group at school. And so, and like one of my teachers for a whole entire year called me Pizzarelli. And
nice.
and when I say it to people, they go, oh, they're shocked. But at the time, I didn't feel hated. She didn't hate me. She thought it was funny. And people thought it was funny, and there's no aggression or hostility, but I just felt like I wasn't part of the group.
No.
And it's not like I went home and cried every day. I just dealt with it. But the fact is, I did not feel a part of the group. But now, 30 years later, I'm a card-carrying member of the white male privilege society.
Yeah, I bet you're astonished.
Yeah, it's just funny how it's progressed in 25 years, 30 years, like how this goes. But thinking back to those days, what you just said before really rang a bell for me. That was what my primary school was like.
Yeah, it was. Look, my whole life in Australia has been like that, and it's only really till it's quite recently that I feel like I have any sort of claim on the place or am part, of anything in Australia. And I think it's more because of being empowered through learning all about this sort of stuff and just saying, well, yes, it is. But yes, I'd like to step back in time and
let's do that.
Work
let's go
out,
for it.
How this came to pass.
Yeah. Let's talk.
All right,
let's talk some history.
As a lawyer, one of the great benefits is the Acts Interpretation Act sends you to read Hansard when you can't figure out, why something is so in terms of legislation. And so as a result of that, I became somewhat addicted to reading Hansard. I love reading Hansard. So I went back to try to find out about race in Australia. And, you may be shocked, but then again, you may not be shocked. And I'm going to be a little bit shocking because I'm going to show a little bit of sympathy for our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.
Okay. That's good. Let's get some more funding.
Well, I have a little bit of sympathy for him because I have a feeling that he and I are of a similar vintage. Or he might be slightly older, but in that case, it's, kind of even worse for him in a way. But we really weren't taught anything about Australian history. I remember the Eureka Stockade, but not much else.
Yeah.
And certainly, a couple of prime ministers, Federation, right? We knew that little bits and pieces, but nothing, no real details, and certainly no details about the White Australia policy. So I grew up thinking it was some quaint little policy that was formulated in the 40s and then dumped in the 70s. And so imagine my shock and horror when watching an SBS documentary, about 10 years ago, was the first time I ever learnt that actually it was around the time of Federation. It was pretty much sealed in to Australia. And so I thought, studying all this stuff about American race, I thought, well, good time to go back to the Australian history. So I thought, well, let's go find this White Australia policy. So I looked it up, and it was known as the Migration Restriction Act of 1901. And it wasn't the very first act that was passed in Parliament, but it was, I've even got it. It was, very recent. It was part of the first Parliament of Australia, so Parliament number 1. It was
a priority,
a massive priority,
yes.
a very big priority.
Yeah.
And it was debated heavily. Now, I have gone through Hansard, and my list is incomplete because unfortunately I had to work, so I could only do this in the...
Some people have jobs.
I know, in my downtime, and I haven't had enough time to, put together a comprehensive list of every time it was mentioned in that first Parliament, but I'm already up to 10 separate days, and debating, really, really deep debates about whether they even should have it, and...
How do they define white? Because that changes.
Well, this was even
it changed for me. Yeah.
Yeah, look, this whether they even should have it was hotly debated. We had a Mr. Joseph Chamberlain, who was the British colonial secretary, because Australia was a colony of England, and so any laws actually that were passed in our Parliament had to get the stamp of the British government, so the British Parliament, the Queen herself. And this fellow was very, very adamant, and I've just got the words here. The exact words were that in Parliament on the 26th of September, it was raised the issue that Mr. Joseph Chamberlain asked the Australian government to bear in mind traditions of empire which make no distinction between colour or race, and his concern about passing a bill based on race, and the fact that would be an act so offensive for Her Majesty's Indian subjects that she, would be hurt to even sanction such a thing. So here we have the British representative saying to Australian Parliament, don't do it.
Because you'll offend the Indian people.
You'll offend the Queen. Yeah. The Queen was not racist.
Oh, that's it.
No, the Queen was very inclusive. She loved India.
Yeah, yeah.
She had a few people did a few dodgy things in her name, for sure, Africa being one of them.
Yes.
The Zulu Wars and so on. There were some problems. But in terms of India, the Queen herself was very oddly open to people of all races and religions. She loved the Irish, and Prince Albert himself, and her son, who became, I think, Edward VII. He was very, very pro everyone, very inclusive. It wasn't until kind of his son and then Edward VIII, when race started being a thing, and Edward VIII really didn't like black people, he didn't like native people, he didn't like native ceremonies, and he had a lot of sympathies with the Nazi Party.
Okay.
But, up until then, Victoria did not like that sort of behaviour. And so while he was saying this, Mr. Chamberlain was saying to the Australian Parliament that he could totally understand that they wanted to have a place for the working man, and England, away from England, for working class people with fresh air, blue skies, beaches, all the things that working England, the people working class English didn't get in England. And so here was this heaven on earth, and that's exactly how Australia was envisaged.
Sure.
And so what they wanted to do was keep it British. And anyway, so there's very big debates as to the delicate nature or the delicate question on how we're going to approach this keeping it British. Are we going to do a white thing, are we going to go with language? And the question was raised, should we keep it to European languages or should we just keep it to English? How should we do it? And then they even mentioned one of the an Indian cricket player who played for the British team at the time, who was a Nawab. And we had, we had a Mr. Ewing, who was the member for Richmond, arguing that the bill should be limited to an English language test, as there was nothing to fear from the educated Asiatic, which means people of India, really, and that region. So he thought, no, that's not an issue. Stick to English language test. All those people will get along with us fine. Mr. Reid of East Sydney, however, a member for East Sydney, decided that he didn't like that, and he objected to the educated colour races as much as the uneducated coloured races. And he was sort of very, very specific about the fact that he didn't think race was a good idea, as in mixing races was a good idea. The member for Wentworth at the time, with interesting parallels to our own previous member for Wentworth, argued against it all. He said, no. The world, he actually gave a globalization sort of argument. He said, the world is a huge place. We need to trade. We are smack bang in the middle of Southeast Asia. The empire is a big place. If we start cutting things off in Australia, we are going to really hurt ourselves.
I'm surprised there was that much disagreement. That's something you don't realise. You don't hear all
this
that.
is the thing. Read Hansard, everybody. It's easy to find. Parliament. Just go to Parliament website. I was fascinated as to how intricate the discussion was and how many different opinions there were. So anyway, they finally went ahead with it, and I thought it was just a beautiful sort of quotation from the member for Wentworth, which I've lost in all my text.
That's okay.
But, he was talking about, didn't we dream of a country where even should the Negro set foot on our land, he would be a free man? So it was very, very optimistic. There was it was quite beautiful. And unfortunately, in the end, they decided, no, we're gonna restrict immigration.
They had a nice chat, and then they moved on with the racism.
Yeah, there was a lot, and it actually there were already immigration restriction acts, across the colonies, so the newly federated states of Australia. So they were trying to actually get a federal version of that to work through, and of course, the problem with the White Australia policy is, first of all, we don't talk about it, and if we need to do something in Australia, let's talk about race, because everyone is affected by this. And by that I mean white people, and this is why I hate using the term white people, black people, Asians. Nobody is one great mass. And the thing that you experienced is the same thing as I experienced, yet neither of us actually experienced overt racism, right? But the White Australia policy was incredibly insidious in the sense that it was not really a White Australia policy. It was an Anglo-Australia policy. And so even the European migrants who came were asked to, they changed their names, they're anglicised, they weren't allowed to speak their own language. I have... my old real estate agent, actually, his father came, I think, in the 40s. He was talking to him about getting beaten up for speaking Greek on the streets, and you, of course, not encouraged to eat your own food. It was very. You had to sort of divest yourself of your culture, and once you do that, it's not just your culture, but you divest yourself of your history. You have to disown your past. You have to disown yourself.
Yeah, that was sort of the classic ideal from a certain kind of person's perspective, that immigrants would
assimilate.
Would join the melting pot
Yes.
and assimilate, and they'd be and they'd have the Australian accent, and they might bring their own food, but otherwise we'd all be the same. That's what that's what used to be.
Well, we'll all be the same so long as we're all
for.
English. That's the thing that we need to. And so as a result, the problem in discussing race in Australia is so fraught, I think, because we have these sort of, the white migrant populations. And again, please forgive me for using that term, because it's not my term of choice, but it's kind of, the term. But all these various sort of, whatever they are, various ethnicities of people that categorized as white. And then they see the sort of newer migrants coming in, demanding rights and privileges, or asserting themselves and taking rights and privileges that, these various generations of even white migrants were not allowed to have. And you can start to really see the resentments that come to exist.
I also feel that when you're comparing Australia to America, and which obviously moved back to America,
We are
soon.
going
Yeah, I
very
know,
shortly to America.
But when you compare Australia to America with racial issues, I think there are some differences that people forget, which is, number one, there are more white people in Australia than in America. Like it's like 80% white in Australia. America's like 60% white. So that's a big difference to begin with. Like the minorities are smaller in Australia than they are in America.
Right.
The second difference is the biggest racial minority in Australia by a long way is people of Asian background, and they are not in the same position as black people and Hispanic people are in America. The black people and Hispanic people in America are there's, especially black people, there's this generational, like multi-generational downtrodden nature of the
race.
In America, and people often compare in Australia, they compare Indigenous people to black people in America. I don't think you should.
I think Native Americans.
I was going to say, that's the comparison. The comparison is Native Americans, who are also about 1 or 2% of America, and they are so much more screwed than even black people are in America.
Well, I mean, yes.
They are really screwed, and they're forgotten. They're never talked about. People talk about black people, they don't talk about Native Americans.
No, the First Nations, and I think the other problem with the way we were taught Australian history, even the best history books, and there are some pretty good ones, but even in the best history books, Aboriginal people are kind of a backdrop. The history books don't talk about them. The history books, except for the collisions with colonials, there's no discussion of Aboriginal people. They sort of just exist, bred out. Let's just breed them out. The stolen generations, the assimilation. I mean, these people were obsessed with assimilation.
Yeah.
We're going to breed out your color. We're going to breed out your race. We're going to breed out your culture. And you can't do that. And so, of course, now we are in a far more enlightened period of our existence. And I think my own daughter's 26. Some of the things that people say, she likes to call me a boomer, but we're Gen X. Thank you, Gen X. We're all boomers now. But so she's shocked by, as your daughter is, shocked by the stuff that went on in our childhood.
Absolutely. But I was just going to finish off the point I was saying that the reason why that's important, it's an important point to make.
The distinction between the black people and the First Nations.
Yeah. The reason why I think it's an important point to make is because in America, black people represent a large proportion of America, like 13% of people, and they represent a lot more than 30% of the culture. Yep. They represent a very large proportion, so they've got some weight. When there's a Black Lives Matter thing, that's got real cultural weight in America in a way that Indigenous people just can't have in Australia because there aren't enough of them. There are smaller numbers of them, and they just don't occupy the same role in Australia that black people do in America, which means that the situation Indigenous people find themselves in Australia, I think, is worse than the situation black people find themselves in America.
I absolutely agree with you. As bad as slavery was,
and it gets ignored.
As bad as all of these things were, it still wasn't as bad as what the Native Americans have gone through as well as, because they also suffer police brutality. I used to actually, be fair, I did my practical legal training with the Aboriginal Legal Service. So I saw there was some great police out there, don't get me wrong. I've worked very closely with a lot of members of the police communities, to do better. But there's also quite a lot of, let's say, unsavoury behaviours that go on, and the statistics are alarming in terms of Indigenous incarceration, etc. And, from an early age. So, and if anyone wants to find out, there's so much work being done in that area. I encourage people to discover, because one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about these things, both the Black Lives Matter in America and Black Lives Matter Australia, is we don't really know what the background to this stuff is. You know, we sort of go, why is it such an issue? You know, what are they even talking about? What are they on about? Because as you just said, especially in terms of Black America, it's very, very out there. You know, it has a lot of coverage. There's Beyonce, there's, you know, Kanye, there's Barack, there's Michelle. There's a lot of very famous, successful Black people in America, and not just famous, successful Black people, but, you know, deep rooted into the culture of America.
Do you want to keep on going? We're talking, like we've cracked open America now.
We
You
have
might as well
cracked
keep on
open
going.
America. No, that's right. And so, as you say, but Native Americans they lack the numbers, and so they don't have the same clout, same as Australian Indigenous people. So it was, you know, I think it's very interesting to see the numbers coming out to support Indigenous Australia, and I hope that, you know, continues. Now, in terms of Black history, it's not something we know that much about, because usually they skip over all the bits. You know, there's like, oh, there was slavery and then there was the Civil Rights Act, right? So that's basically how it works. So let me just I've just put together a little timeline. So we've got slavery in America began. The first slaves came to Virginia in 1619, but they weren't treated as slaves in America for the first 15 years. They were actually treated as indentured servants in the same way as white indentured servants were treated. And by that, what is an indentured servant, you ask? Okay, well, an indentured servant they were men and women, and often children, who came from England and Germany to America for the betterment of their future. They didn't have the money to pay for the transportation from those countries, and so what they did was they'd sign contracts to say that when they got to America, they would pay off whatever debts they owe. And once their servitude, periods of servitude went from, you know, between 4 years to 7 years, and the kids had sometimes much longer, you know, once they attained adulthood. And so once you've worked off your period of servitude, you were allowed to you were given a piece of land and a gun.
Always a gun. Always a gun.
Always a gun. Piece of land and a gun. So you can also see how sort of tied in with American sort of history and settlement guns are. Like, they're very, very close to their psyche. So a piece of land and a gun. And this included Black indentured servants. Okay, so I have for you the name of a rather well-known Black indentured servant who had worked off his servitude, and his name is Anthony Johnson. Now, his story is deeply heartbreaking. So 1621, he arrived in Virginia, and he was recorded as Antonio, a Negro.
Sure.
That's how his name was, you know, recorded as. And he went to work on a tobacco plantation. Now, he eventually worked off his time, but what here you go, I'm just reading this. So he actually married Mary, a Negro, as well, some years later, after they'd worked off their servitude, and they bought their way out of bondage. They acquired their own land. They bought a ranch. They raised livestock. And he had bought properties in a few different colonies by that stage. And then in 1665, he sold the 250 acres that he had acquired. So quite a lot of land.
Yeah,
not
he's done
nothing.
all right.
Yeah, not a postage stamp.
It's very Trumpian.
And they moved to Maryland, where they leased a 300-acre tract of land. But in the meantime, what had happened was slavery had been legalized.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so what do you think they did, Chaz?
So this 80-year-old slave.
No. What do you think they did to Anthony Johnson? Do you think they allowed him to live out his life in peace as a freed man who had paid off his
I'm guessing
servitude?
not.
Guessing right. Yeah. They took back the land.
Yeah.
They said, you have no rights. And sorry, but you are now 3/4 human.
Yeah.
You have no citizenship or anything of the sort. So that was short and sweet, and that was over. And how did they justify it? Well, why did this happen? It happened because they had moved from tobacco to cotton, and cotton was very, very labour intensive. And also that was one reason. The second reason was the white indentured servants had an uprising, and it was getting expensive because, every 7 years you've got to replace them, and then it's like you've lost all the knowledge. You've got to train another bunch of people, and they're all ungrateful.
You can't pay them.
Can't pay them. No, you can't. But they leave you. They leave you, and there's land, and there's guns, and you got to fork out for the food and whatever, and then they leave you. Well, so these slave ships. I mean, Antonio Negro, he came as a slave. He was actually captured as a slave. He didn't come of his own volition. So it was the first drop of slaves, but they weren't treated as slaves at the time.
They became
But
slaves
very
later,
soon
yeah.
after that, 15 years after that, that was it. Slavery was enacted or made official, and then in the year, I think it was 1665, a court in Virginia ruled that because he was a Negro and by consequence an alien, all land that he had in Virginia now belonged to the Crown. So two things. First of all, it was cheaper to have slaves. You could own them for life. You could own their children. They were not seen as citizens. They were given the reason that they were allowed to, they use black people and not white people. Why didn't they have white slaves? Because it was considered that black people weren't Christians and therefore it's fine. If they're not Christians, therefore we can make slaves of them and we're not going to go to hell for it. So there's some solid justifications, here on earth.
They thought that through.
On earth and later in heaven, that's right. Yeah. So they had it down, this life and the next. So anyway, that was the beginning of a very long and awful history. And you would think that there was this very famous case. I'm just going to give it to you in a nutshell.
Yeah.
The long, sad history of black people in America. So just as you think they're getting somewhere, it's taken back from them. Yeah. So indentured servitude, he did well, Antonio and his wife, and it looked like it taken away again. Now, there was a case called the Dred Scott and Sanford. You're aware of that, aren't you? Everyone knows about that. I didn't, so I had to look it up because I'm not that. I don't have a lot of detail about American history, but it was good to find out. So in this case, husband and wife, Dred and Harriet Scott, were filing for freedom in the state of Wisconsin. So they had moved. And from the state they were in, which I think was Maryland, am I wrong? Probably, don't quote me on that. But they moved to Wisconsin and said, well, now we're free because there was the doctrine of once free, always free. Yes. And then it was actually determined by the Supreme Court. It got to the Supreme Court, 7-2 ruling against them. And the ruling was that a slave could never hold citizenship. The slave states should not have had to uphold freedom, and Congress should never have prohibited slavery in the Wisconsin Territory or any territory. And it found that the Constitution of the United States did not apply to slaves. And it was, by this stage, it had stopped being an economic argument and had become one of ethnicity, skin and ethnicity.
And this was right just before the Civil War, wasn't it?
Oh, look, yes. Yeah. Then the 13th Amendment was passed, outlawing slavery in 1865.
Just after the Civil War? Yeah.
Right. And in late 1865, Abraham Lincoln had decided that he was going to give universal suffrage to black men. Well, not all slaves, but black men, ex-slave men. Yeah. So he was going to allow them to vote. And so the southern states, or rather the slave states, Mississippi, South Carolina, they weren't having it. And so despite the 13th Amendment, which actually abolished slavery, and remembering this was, it wasn't a full nation. It was like there was a bunch of states and then they decided to federate and, have the the central government. And the idea of states' rights, though, was still paramount. States' rights were seen as supreme. So Mississippi, South Carolina thought, well, we're smarter than that. We are, okay, fine, slavery, you can abolish slavery, but we're just going to, segregate slaves. So the Jim Crow laws were passed. And not only was this segregation of, physical segregation, but black people weren't allowed to have any occupation other than farmer or servant unless they paid an annual tax of $10, so between $10 and $100, which...
They have to pay a tax to be something other than a farmer or a servant.
Correct. And the provision hit free blacks living in Charleston and former slave artisans. So, again, you try to get ahead.
That was a law.
It's a law.
Wow.
You have no idea. I mean, I'm giving you like the short version of Jim Crow. This is the thing that I was trying to explain, I mean, with black people, like why are some of the neighborhoods, you were telling me about neighborhoods, which I haven't seen the show yet, but why is it at that situation? Why is it like that? Well, it is like that because every time you try to get ahead, you push back. It's one step forward, two steps back. So here's the 13th Amendment has been passed. But of course, then, Jim Crow. And look, the government, because I think it was Woodrow Wilson who came in after Abraham Lincoln, who was a Southern politician, and he was very pro-slavery.
Yep, he's World War One.
Yeah, and he actually segregated...
Woodrow Wilson, you saying?
Was it Woodrow Wilson?
Woodrow Wilson
was
Woodrow Wilson was World War One.
Who was the one after...
You're talking about, are you talking about Andrew Jackson?
Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson. Sorry, Andrew Johnson.
Jackson, Wilson.
This is why we need Dr. Dave.
This is why we need Dr. Dave. Don't hate me.
Andrew Johnson.
Right.
Andrew Johnson was
right.
yeah,
Andrew
exactly,
Johnson.
Yeah.
So what they started to see was Jim Crow was kind of enforced. In places where it should never have been, especially with the 13th Amendment around. Wilson segregated the Navy.
Yes,
and the
that sounds like Woodrow
forces.
Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson.
That's our mate Woodrow Wilson.
Sorry, mixing up my racist presidents. But so Woodrow Wilson did that. I knew I had a beef with him about something.
Yeah.
So he did that. But so we've got the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery, and so hence we've got this little. It's not the Confederation anymore. It's actually they're the Southern States of America by this stage. Yeah. So they've decided it's going to be Jim Crow and no one is going to stop them doing it. And no one did stop them doing it. Then the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868 to try to get the states to do what they were supposed to do. So the 13th Amendment was about slavery is abolished. The 14th Amendment was about equal protection under the law. And that was supposed to get... the southern states to toe the line and treat black people properly. But of course, there's always a way around that. And I regret to say that there were, these cases called the slaughterhouse cases in 1873, where it was decided that the 14th Amendment supposedly didn't have that effect. It wasn't really supposedly about giving people their rights, but it was about saying that they had rights on things like national waterways and so on. So you had certain coverage by the federal or the government for if you were sort of travelling on a national highway or something.
There's a recurring misapprehension in this American history that I found where people think that when you pass a law or a constitutional amendment, that fixes everything. But the fact is you need 20 to 30 years to make change. And it happens over and over and over again. And if you do it in one law and you don't have the 20 or 30 years to back you up, people chip away at it and it's gone before you know it. This happens over and over again.
Even the 13th Amendment abolished slavery except in the case of prisoners who shall be subjected to hard labour. And so the South came up with a way to make that happen as well. Yeah,
if you want change, you need to keep at it for an entire generation, which is really frustrating. And this is a relevant lesson right now for the Black Lives Matter thing. Right now, people are are talking about statues and we're going to get to this.
We'll get to
We'll
statues,
get
yeah.
to this. They're talking about that kind of stuff, and that's fine. But if you want to actually deal with inequality and you want to deal with the serious issues that face black people in America, it's not going to happen in a year. It's going to happen in 20 years. It's going to take over generation after generation of politicians who are serious about it to chip away, because these things, they just take a long time.
And in Australia, I definitely think we need to have a nationwide conversation about the insidious impact of the White Australia policy and its continuing sort of the poison. Because, as you say, it's the hidden racism against a lot of the white ethnicities or white ethnic groups as well, who felt it. But now suddenly you're lumped into the white male category, whereas that was never your experience necessarily. You're an Italian male. You didn't grow up as a white male, did you?
No,
You grew up as
I
an
didn't.
Italian male.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. On that note, actually, I tell you, this is slightly irrelevant, but it's just off the back of that. One group which I feel a little bit sorry about at the moment in this cultural period is women, and I'll tell you why. Because you can tell me very concerned about this. I feel
I will
like
be the spokeswoman for women.
I feel
right?
like in about 2013, at least in Australia, we decided that we're going to focus a lot on women. Like around about the misogyny speech from Julie Gillard. It was around about that period.
I remember there were a lot of media put that down at the time.
No, but basically from about 2013, 2014, about a 5-year period, 2013, 2014 to about 2018, there was a lot of focus on gender inequality, and there's a lot of talk about unequal wages, a lot of talk about, where are the women in the media? There's a lot of that kind of talk. Right. I at least I was conscious of it. I was conscious of it.
I was probably doing my PhD and missed it.
Maybe, yeah, but it was only went for 4 or 5 years. It was a very short window, and then all of a sudden, people decided somewhere around 2019, okay, we've had enough. Let's start talking about racial minorities now, and I feel like at the moment that it ties into one of my least favorite memes or cultural concepts, which is Karen, the Karen concept, which is on the internet.
Yeah.
Like
Ken and Karen now.
Yeah. So we went from people being hyper focused, at least seeming to me, on sexism. But there's just not much talk about sexism in the last year or two. It's about racism all of a sudden.
Yeah,
and so just to finish off, that I just don't feel like the problems of sexual inequality have been solved at all. And I feel like there's still plenty of gender discrimination, and we've just moved on. And women who talk about this stuff are called Karens now.
No. It's not women who talk about this stuff. It's women who throw tantrums about stuff. That's the Karens. Have you've seen the recent ones of the Karens? It's not just about race. Karens are about
They're about
any
entitlement.
sort of entitlement. So the woman at Trader Joe's, who's throwing stuff out of.
But
that's.
So what I was going to say though is that I understand. Look, I laugh at the videos as well, but I feel like that the Karen cliche of a whinging, nagging, shrew is a very gendered cliche that is reminiscent of what I would call sexist stereotypes.
But Twitter, you'll be happy to know, has just finally named the male version, and he is known as Ken.
Sure. Well, let's see if Ken gets the play that Karen has gotten.
I think I will, because I heard a really lovely little discussion a couple of years ago from I think it was the Vice Chancellor of the law faculty at UTS, where I did my law degree. Went there for some event, or the Chancellor, perhaps, I can't remember who. And she was talking about the big change, the big social change at the moment is the idea of behavior. This is where it all is. Gender, culture, race are all taking second place to the concept of good behavior and good citizenship. And so, that's where your Karen is placed. Definitely a gendered stereotype, but taken in the context of general entitlement. I mean, it'll be interesting. Are there going to be black Karens? Are there Latino Karens? I'm sure there are Karens of every every ethnicity, and I'll be interested to see if those Karens come up. But yes, it is a little bit of a gendered sort of racist stereotype as well.
Yeah. Anyway, I just
Having said
I
that-
feel like we shouldn't.
Yeah, it's not helpful. I mean, I don't think the Karen thing's necessarily helpful, but I don't necessarily know that they're looking at it as a shrewish woman. I think they're just looking at it as someone who behaves really badly in a very entitled manner.
But they got to be a woman.
Well, these ones have been. And then we've got a bunch of men who are doing it, and they're my secret suspicion is that some of them aren't real. I think some of them must be actors.
Maybe.
Because how can that even be?
maybe.
You know, who would do that knowing it's going to go viral?
Yeah, all I would throw out there to people is that all the problems of sexism I don't think have been quite solved.
No, and we're gonna. I think
saying.
we're gonna have to take the walking and chewing gum at the same time
Yeah.
approach to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I know that you were upset about, you know, like going from crisis to crisis. I mean, maybe that's some of what you were talking about. Like we leave all this thing.
That is what I was talking about.
yeah.
You're talking about a comment I made on the Facebook page
yes.
about how cynical I get about these little periods where people get all excited about one particular social movement, and then 6 months later they're talking about something else and they completely forgot what came before. And I do think we like I was just saying about the 20-year thing. We need to keep on going. And if you care about something, you're going to need to keep on going and make it work.
I think, you know, I think though things are changing underneath. You know, look, here you are. You're again. I think I replied to you on the Facebook page saying I felt hopeful. Like here you are, engaging with people for starters on Facebook, and then here I am because you invited me. I mean, we have been talking every so often, you know, for quite a while about working on some level with some aspect of Planet America, or not Planet America. You know, PEP. I mean, on and off. I think but not in any concrete way. I mean, there was a vague, this would be not a terrible thing, you know, some form. I think I offered my research services or something. But, you know, here I am, though, and I think that's a change. Like, where are we in the halls of power, Chaz? I mean, you have a podcast and I'm a guest on it. So I would say, you know, 20 years ago, that was not going to happen.
That is fair. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'd call this podcast the Hall of
Maybe
Power.
we get 7,000 listeners. It's more than I've ever had.
Well,
Bigger audience than I've ever had.
Well, now you do.
Yeah,
now
there
you do.
are.
I want to give you a chance before, I'm just conscious of the time. I want to give you a
wrap up
chance to
soon.
run at some of the topical elements of some of the race stuff. But do you have any more to say about history before we do that?
I think we could probably, you know, round that up. But the reason I wanted to talk about that aspect was because I think people only saw what's happening now in the Black Lives Movement. And I think people are a little bit confused. Oh, but why? We've had a black president. There's Michelle. There's, you know, rich, famous black people. What's wrong with these people? It's not that. It's a case of they keep trying and then push back, trying and push back. And after a while, some people frankly give up. But even the ones who aren't giving up, like in you know, we've had viral videos of that guy who owned the shop. He was the shopkeeper. He rang the police because someone was causing trouble in his shop and they came and arrested him.
Yeah.
So these are, you know, we started as economic convenience or economic expediency, slavery. It was justified on a religious basis, and then it was codified on a racial basis. So we were talking about the idea of institutional racism. And so I went back to try to find the roots of it, and I think we've succeeded. When you've got the Supreme Court itself saying, oh, no, that amendment had nothing to do with, you know, what it was supposed to do. That's problematic.
I'm gonna let you take your pick here, Indrani. We got statues. We've got the culture stuff, like Gone with the Wind type stuff. We've got the Confederate bases. We've got police stuff.
All right. Well, let's do two things. I want to just quickly give a little talk about Gone with the Wind because I think I could tie that to statues.
Okay, go for it.
So Gone with the Wind. I think Gone with the Wind and my great favourite Dukes of Hazzard. All right, the Dukes of Hazzard. I don't know if you ever watched it.
I hated the Dukes of Hazzard.
Oh, all right. See, I love, and I think maybe I love country music. I love folk music.
Sure.
And I love mountain music because I just love the twang. So you give me a banjo, or you can't stop me.
I loved ABBA.
I also loved ABBA. Hey, I like everything. And I've been learning Swedish, so that's good too. But I really love folk music, and I love the Dukes of Hazzard.
Sure.
And I rewatched some of that too. And the first few episodes in the first season with Waylon Jennings, that was really banging on about General Lee and how great he was and heroic. And it showed the history of the car as well, which was named the General Lee.
Yes.
Which really astonishes me because it is an extremely inclusive TV show. They had a lot of black people, well, not a lot, but some black people in there who were friends. You know, they had black guys, black women in there, and it was very inclusive. So I think with, I'm going to blame Hollywood for some of these things, for not doing their research properly. I think that Hollywood could have done a better job of actually understanding the significance of the Confederate flag and the General Lee. And it was a bunch of writers who came up with these concepts, you know. So there were stereotypical Dixie stereotypes. They could have picked anything, but this is where they went. Gone with the Wind, more complicated because Margaret Mitchell, she's from the South, you know, this is the thing she's writing about is very different. So I think Dukes of Hazzard, I'm not going to hate it. And I'm not going to cancel the Dukes of Hazzard, you know, because the Dukes themselves are really good guys. And it's the idea of the Confederate rebels, you know, the rebel flag as being, you know, anti-authoritarian is how that flag was adopted, which is, you know, a mistake.
So are you of the view that...
Of cancel culture.
Well, I was going to say, are you of the view that there is some objective merit or otherwise of a TV show, or if someone's offended by it, it should go?
Well, I have a TV show that I really hate, but I loved. I mean, I enjoyed it and I watched it, but I really hate it and it hurt me badly. And I wish I could remember the name of it. But it's about the British. It's a British Raj time. It's about the British in India, the hill stations of India, and it's quite popular. I wish I knew what the name of it. And that really, really upset me. And the main character, the woman, she was actually racist. That was how she was cast because, you know, she was a racist character. And wow, that hurt. Right, it really hurt. And I watch all that stuff about India and race. And my family were very proud nationalists. So, you know, booted the British out. So, sorry, British. You know, I still love the Queen, though. But, you know, we were definitely part of that, my family. And so, you know, there is a bit of national pride there and it does hurt. So I think, you know, the reality is history is what it is. And some things, you know, people have to make a judicious decision. Do they want to put themselves through it? You know, because it's, whereas I have, you know, white Australian friends, some of my best friends from high school who watch that show and they love it because they don't understand the cultural connotations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and I'll put to you that I'm betting there are a large number of people out there who are black or otherwise who would say Dukes of Hazzard just has to go.
I don't know that many. I haven't read that much about it. I'd like to. I mean, I wish I had time. I might put something on Facebook about what I find out about Dukes of Hazzard and what people think. I don't know about the Dukes of Hazzard. I know My Big Fat Greek Wedding. You know, I love that film. It makes me laugh and laugh and laugh. My Greek friends loathe it. They just really hate the sort of, you know, stereotype, and it makes them cringe because, you know, they grew up in Australia where they did cop that whole, you know, WOG thing. And I swear, I thought with Nick Giannopoulos and the WOG's Out of Work, I thought that was very brave in the 80s, you know, really owning it. And it was a little bit self-stereotyping as well. But, you know, I think they worked their way through to become, you know, to attain full humanity in the eyes of Australian society. In terms of Gone with the Wind, I don't agree with Dr. Dave. I don't think it's a shit film. I think that was his exact quote, was it? It was a shithouse film. I don't think it's a shithouse film. I think it's a remarkable film and it's a remarkable story. And Hattie McDaniel, despite her mammy role and the stereotypes and everything, what a performance she gave. You know, but you can't, like, that is a long film and that was a massive role and she won a supporting actress Academy Award, though she did have to come around the back entrance. She was very proud of it. And I thought, what an amazing performance. Let's just pretend for a second that story didn't exist in the backdrop of a slave-owning family and that she wasn't a slave. It would be a great story as it is. The fact that it is about the South, the fact that they, do talk about political meetings, Klan meetings and lynchings and also lynchings just on the side, that didn't start with black people. It became that during the Jim Crow laws, but that started with white from a town called Lynchburg, apparently.
I did not know that.
There you go. Yeah. It's what they call self-help under the law. We just go around and we sort it ourselves.
Yeah, okay.
They didn't have much law enforcement, but with Gone with the Wind, that is deeply problematic. And I think people can still watch it. And to be very honest, I watched it during the height of the new controversy just to see what did I think. I think it's remarkable performances. I think it's all round. I thought they were all great, and that was Vivien Leigh's first big role in America. But I have to say I have lost my taste for it to some extent.
Okay.
I do not love it as much as I did before I did all my research on what happened to black people. I don't find it as entertaining. I now watch it as a cultural curiosity.
Well, what I was going to say was that when it comes to all this stuff, all this TV show cancellation stuff, is that TV shows, like I'm someone who makes TV, and I can tell you TV shows aren't made for 50 years' time. They're made for now.
Yeah, but they have that impact, I'm still talking about Justice League,
Sure,
League of Justice.
yeah, absolutely. And people can go back and they can get a nostalgia hit from the stuff that they enjoyed from before. But the fact is that no 8-year-old is going to watch Gone with the Wind. No, like they watch the stuff that's around now, right? And like half my TV shows, inverted commas, have been cancelled because you can't get them. But the reason you can't get them is not because they're racist.
No.
The reason you can't get them is because it's hard to get old TV shows.
Oh, boy, do I know that. I scour Amazon for getting DVDs.
And the reason it's hard to get them is because TV shows are made for now. They're not made for 50 years' time. Every now and then, some show sneaks through, some movie sneaks through, or some TV show that has some cachet in the future. And it's still, but you look at Netflix and there are, 1,000 movies? There aren't that many movies. The fact is that millions of movies have been made.
Correct.
And we can only get 0.1% of them, if that.
Yeah.
Right. And the rest have been inverted commas cancelled.
Yeah.
And I can just I don't care if one movie or one TV show is unavailable because most movies and TV shows are unavailable. And if you like it, if you want it, you can get it anyway, the same way that you get anything else with elbow sweat because it's hard to get
so what
old
are you
TV
saying?
shows.
Are you for cancel or not for cancel?
I'm saying it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter whether you cancel or
I'm
not.
saying it's complete furphy. I'm saying it's the kind of thing that people get worked up about and it's all hype.
No,
that's what I'm saying.
What I'm saying is something like Gone with the Wind is a dangerous film in the sense that it is maybe not to Dr. Dave, he doesn't like it, but to everyone else, it's a deeply appealing film because it's beautifully made. It's well scripted. It's incredibly well acted. It's a seductive film. And my concern is that future generations will watch that with no understanding of context, just the way I watched it with no understanding of context. And then if you are not of my bent, which is, go and obsessively research things till you understand the whole story, most people, hey, I only researched America now after watching a guy being, killed on a viral video.
Gone with the Wind is the most successful movie of all time, right?
And Jimmy Carter loved it. And it's a very well-written book as well. The thing is, it's good art.
Sure. Right?
And the problem is it's good art set on a slave-owning plantation.
No, I understand. But what I'm saying is that Gone with the Wind is a slight exception because it's the most successful movie of all time. So there is a certain curiosity in that regard. But I would argue that if no one talked about it, in 20 years, no one is going to be looking at Gone with It. I'd say no one looks at Gone with the Wind now, apart from people who are 50 or 60 or whatever who have some memory.
What you're
of
getting
it.
at.
It's gone. It's gone. It's part of history.
As
it's
a cultural
gone.
curiosity,
Totally.
it's just going to be on the shelves of time.
Yeah, it just moved on. Like Sunset Boulevard was one of the most successful movies of the 50s. Who's watched Sunset Boulevard now?
I have. But,
okay, I've watched it too.
People, all right.
Because I'm a
Younger
movie...
people, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all right.
It's like the culture moves on. And I would relate this to the statues in the same way.
Oh, no, this is where we disagree.
Well, hang on. I'll just finish the point.
Finish.
Finish the point and then go crazy. We talk about the statues. How many statues do you think there are in America? There are like 7. Like last I saw, there was like I think I saw it was 770 according to the Southern Public Law Center of. Hang on, I'll just look it up. It was 770, I think, 771 Confederate statues and monuments in America, right? So can you imagine how many statues and monuments there are in total? There'd be tens of thousands of them. How many have been torn down? What, 10, 15? Like people going around going, oh, they're tearing down history. No, they're not. There is 99.99% of the statues and monuments are untouched. They've torn down 10 or 15. I mean, I'm not a big statue tearer downer, but what I'm saying is it makes no difference. This is just people looking at stuff on Twitter and going, oh my God, and thinking that represents everything. It doesn't. It represents 10 or 15 statues. And the fact is history has not been torn down.
No.
It's people are protesting and they do something visible and something that gets them excited to protest. And then you move on.
That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is Mississippi finally decided to change its flag,
which is great.
And I think that's long overdue. Look, artifacts mean things. If they didn't mean things, kids would be, all these young people would be traipsing around in Nazi uniforms. Artifacts mean things. You wouldn't be wearing an AC/DC T-shirt. I don't know if you do or don't, but David Bowie, he's my idol, my first great love. Symbols mean things. Artifacts mean things. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother with them. Okay,
Sure.
so they have meaning. Now, I do want to have this. I have thought hard about the statues question.
Keep going.
Now, the statues question for you and I know that you sort of you don't think they should be taken down. Now, I don't necessarily care whether some are taken down or not. And this is a deeply personal opinion, but Chaz, neither you nor I have a personal connection with some of those things, and to you and I, some of those things are history. To some people, those things are not yet history. They are still their living present. Like if you're Aboriginal, you are not past that period. I mean, there's definitely a lot of, there's even with Aboriginal people, they're not one mass. There's many different communities, there's many peoples, there are many attitudes, feelings. They don't even agree necessarily with their own leaders or that they are leaders. So there's a lot of, it's not homogenous. Okay. But the reality is, and I don't think we have at all tried to deny that things are still pretty bad for Indigenous people in Australia.
Yep.
For very many reasons. And I think for some people, those statues represent the current lived experience. And so I guess that, and I wouldn't have, thought hard about it like Captain Cook. Like he was, from all reports, a reasonably affable guy. He was a decent person. He was wrote kind things about Indigenous people.
Don't think the Hawaiians liked him much.
Yeah, I think there was a misunderstanding. But again, I don't think they hated him entirely either.
Sure.
But
they got the last laugh.
Yeah, well, they apparently did. But my point is, so, to me, when I grew up in Melbourne, so you go to Fitzroy, you go to Captain Cook's cottage, it's a historical curiosity. But I'm not Aboriginal. When I went back to Calcutta after about 20 years, I went to the Victoria Memorial, and it's this huge memorial building that was built during the heyday of the British Raj for Her Majesty, the Queen Victoria. And the one thing that the British did do in India was they memorialised themselves with a hell of a lot of statues. Like there's the cemetery there in Park Street, which I also went to visit. And literally they are palatial, these memorials that they have to themselves. And you go and read, who are these people? Nobody important, just some random person came to India, died in India, had a palatial, building built in their memory. And it's the first time, and having, when I went as a young person, I didn't have my humanities background again, go the humanities. But this time I did, full humanities lenses, knowledge of the legal, all that stuff. So I went with that. And I went to the Victorian Memorial hoping for a nostalgic, oh, beautiful, wonderful, how interesting. I got there, looked at these statues of people. I thought, why are they even here? I was outraged. I felt, why are we memorializing these people, who were so rude about India? They were so appallingly rude. I felt like I just actually felt anger. I thought, why the hell hasn't this place been bulldozed? Yeah. And I'm a rational person. But you see, the thing is, we don't care about history if it's not our history, because as empathetic as we try to be, we can't feel it if it's still alive in us. There'll be a lot of Italian stuff that will get under your skin, or things that people say, you may or may not feel closely enough to it to want it removed. And I really don't want the Victoria Memorial removed, but a few statues here and there, Though I sort of don't think we should get rid of everything. Like, they changed all the names of the cities in India, which I think, why? That's what they were called. Stick to what they were called. That's what they were. It wasn't an anglicisation. That was just the name. I don't think that helps necessarily. But if that makes people feel better, so what? And with Aboriginal people, with black people who see things like that, some of this stuff is in their current lived experience. So my final comment on the situation is, as to whether we remove them or not, we have to decide what sort of society or community do we live in. Is it one where we see each other as our brothers and sisters, members of our community? Or is it a community where you're all in it for your own self? Is it a hard individualism sort of thing? Are we a community, or are we just random bodies floating around, And the answer to that is going to determine whether we keep the statues or cancel the statues.
Just to be clear.
As in my position.
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Yeah, just to be clear, I said that I'm not a big statue tearer downer, as in that's not the kind of thing I would be doing. But I don't have a problem. I mean, the point I made is I don't think it makes any difference. I think the people making out like this is some big deal. I'm talking about the reaction to it. People going, oh no, they're destroying history. Oh, this is like 1984. Like the people doing that. I just think it's
That's
just
a bit
way over the top.
Yeah.
There's the tiniest proportion of statues being torn down, which, as far as I can see, there are maybe 2,000 or 3,000 statues, possibly tens of thousands of statues that could be torn down, and it's pretty much random which ones have been torn down. When I say random, I don't mean that they have reasons.
No.
I mean they could have picked any of 10,000 statues.
Correct.
And they chose 15, right?
Of the ones that were there.
Yeah. It doesn't make a difference.
No, and
so-
the Romans would agree with you. The Romans, put up and tore down and melted down statues.
Well, there we go. And so what I would say, when
Willy-nilly.
you're talking about the community we want to build, the thing, for me, all roads lead to the same, I'm talking about Rome, all roads lead to the same thought, which is the community I want to build is a community where people stop getting worked up over what they just saw on Twitter 5 seconds ago, and just stop and think about things and just and walk around the real world and realize that there is a context, and the context is much, much bigger than the very narrow focus that we tend to place on these things. And there's no need to get angry, and there's no need to hate each other, and there's no need to divide and to say, oh, it's like you are the direct opposite of me, and you must be, and you are evil, and all the rest. And I just feel like this statue thing is, if you're offended, like if we're in a period of protest, I don't have a big problem with people protesting by pulling down a statue. That's in my view.
That's not the point.
Yes, exactly. And if the Confederate statues are bothering people, I got no problem with passing bills where you get rid of all 770 of them. I don't care. Like if that's something that the people do care about, then sure, go for it. I don't have an opinion on that. I'm just saying that I think that people need to chill out a little bit about this kind of stuff, because I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps at all. And
well, it has taken a bit of the focus away from the actual Black Lives movements, and they are very important.
On that note, I'm so conscious of the time.
This is so long. Is this our longest PEP ever?
Definitely our longest. We're past 2 hours.
Whoa.
On that note, I'm going to put something up. It was a really interesting article. I can imagine most of the people on our Facebook page are not going to enjoy
They're not
this
going to
article.
watch this either. How many are going to be watching this to the end? There's a quiz.
Tell us in the comments if you watch this to the end. They're not going to like this article, but there was an interesting food for thought. I thought it was a Ross Douthat article.
Who?
Ross Douthat. He's a conservative opinion writer for the New York Times.
Oh, right, that's probably why I don't read it.
And he wrote an article. Basically, what he was suggesting was, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but I do think that it raises some points that I do agree with, which is he was suggesting that this little moment we're in at the moment, where there's a lot of cultural talk about like with the Black Lives Matter stuff, people focus on the cultural elements more than say the economic elements. He described this as Bernie Sanders' second defeat. And the reason why he's saying that the Bernie Sanders movement was about economics over culture, about uniting with the white working class and the minorities to talk about socialism and talk about the economics. Yeah. And Bernie Sanders, all he wanted to talk about was the 1%. And he didn't want to talk about black this or brown that. He wanted to talk about the 1%, economics and $15 minimum wage and so forth. But people don't want to talk about that as much as they want to talk about statues, and they want to talk about cultural issues. And what Ross Douthat was saying was he was arguing that there's a reason for this. And the reason for this is that corporations have really gotten on board with this. The corporations love this. There's a lot of cancelling going on from corporations.
So much.
And the reason he says is because that fits in nicely with managerialism.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't need to pay people more. No. They don't need to. It doesn't cost them money. This works out very nicely. Woke capitalism works out beautifully for capitalism.
100%.
And I'll read you
culture washing. It's like the culture version of greenwashing.
I'll read you one of his quotes.
What are we calling it? Blackwashing?
I'm not gonna go there. The quote that this is one of the quotes from his article. I'll put the whole article up. The fact that corporations are outdistancing even politicians in paying fealty to anti-racism is perhaps the tell. It's not that corporate America is suddenly deeply committed to racial equality. Even for woke capital, the capitalism comes first. Rather, it's that anti-racism is a cultural curriculum, a rhetoric of re-education is relatively easy to fold into the mechanisms of managerialism under the tutelage of the Human Resources Department. The idea that you need to retrain your employees so that they can work together without microaggressing isn't Marxism, cultural or otherwise. It's just a novel form of Fordism with white fragility gurus in place of efficiency experts. I reckon...
I don't disagree with him. It might be early Fordism. It certainly wasn't late Fordism. Ford had gone a bit off the rails by the end.
Where I disagree with him is I think he's looking too much on the short term. I think he's looking right now for this 1 month. I think he's right about this month. But I think if we talk about it for decades, for 10 years, 20 years, we won't be talking about statues in 10 years.
No. It'll be rights and equality.
Exactly.
Soon. It's going to come.
Exactly. You just got to keep at it and you'll get there. But I do think that we can get distracted by the cultural elements when what really matters. I'm not necessarily saying the Sanders stuff, but just this was about the police. Let's not forget the police. That's how this started. And
then it became institutional racism.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we can keep on going as well because on the show I've been talking about plenty of the other stuff. But I think that we can get distracted and getting worked up and excited about some George Washington statue having blood thrown on it when that's not really what this is about for anyone.
No.
And so that's what some rando protester did. That's
what rando protesters do. It's not like, in the heat of the moment.
Sure. That's what I'm saying.
Vicissitudes of life, as they say in the law.
That rando protester does not represent all protesters.
No.
They certainly don't represent all black people.
No.
And they certainly don't represent all people worried about structural racism.
Yep.
And so I just that's what I just throw out there. That sort of thought.
I think you're right. And I think, what's his name? Douthat. So I do actually subscribe to the New York Times, but I haven't had any time to read it. And also, I find sometimes when they put the conservatives in there, they're just so over the top that I was just like, my life is too short for that, so I ignore them.
Fine.
If they actually had real stuff to say, I do read stuff from the Federalist Society, believe it or not, occasionally.
I've got the Federalist in my reading list.
And they're not always wrong. I mean, they're not always right, but they're not always wrong.
Though. It's a big reading list.
It's big. But
anything else you want to say?
The point is, just like I think the reason people are, talk about statues and not income equality is it's hard to talk about income equality. But I don't think it's a total loss, this like getting excited over small things like statues, because it's one thing and then it sticks in your consciousness. Yeah. And then the next thing is, okay, now that's nice. What about?
Yeah. If there's a follow-up, then it's fine.
Oh, there will be.
Yeah. Now, we're so far over time.
This is so massive, and we still didn't finish all our topics.
I told you this would happen beforehand, didn't I?
You did.
I want you to pick anything left that you want to say, and you get the last word.
No. You go for it. I'm actually fine with it. Was there anything that I didn't? Everybody read Dr. Dave's conversation piece.
Yeah.
Because I meant to preface my race talk with that, but we came in it through a different way. Dr. Dave, I'm not going to give away the whole thing. You can read it. He wrote a lovely piece in the conversation where he highlighted the current problems facing the US as part of a longer timeline, which is government dysfunction and racial injustice. And he argues that Trump is the fantasy of black gratitude for white success, embodies that fantasy. And I don't necessarily think he's wrong. He's got some brains, the old Dr. Dave, hasn't he?
He does. He's a smart guy. I tell you what, actually, I'm going to tell a lie. I am going to put in one more thing, because I want people in the comments, if you've survived this long, I want you to try and answer me this. And I'm going to ask this Dr. Dave. I'm going to put him on notice if he's watching this still. I'm going to ask Dr. Dave the next time we have a podcast about this exact question. This was a poll from YouGOV about this issue, about police and black people. The polling question: do black and white people receive equal treatment from the police? That's from this week. White people said 33 to 51. 33% said yes, 51% said no. So white people are saying more white people are saying that black and white people don't receive equal treatment from the police, which is that's good. Black people, 4% said yes, 83% said no. All right, that's not a surprise. Well, actually, 4% is
that
4%,
is a surprise.
4% is a surprise, but still, it's not a surprise that it was lopsided. No. This is my question, and riddle me this, folks. Do black and white people receive equal treatment from the police in your community?
Ooh.
Okay, in your community, not generally. White people, 49% yes, 30% no. So now they're saying yes, they do in our community.
Close to our home, in our backyard.
Black people, 66% yes, 12% no.
Gracious.
66% of black people saying they do get equal treatment from the police in their community, even though generally 4% of black people said they.
There are reasons for that, and that's a credit to the various police departments. They do. There are a lot of community engagement officers in the police forces. Look, I've worked on both sides of the law. I'm a criminal defence lawyer, but I've worked with the sexual assault unit as well, on the other side with the prosecutors. So I have a huge admiration for the job that the police do. I'm definitely not going to put them down. I'm grateful that we have them. Definitely there's, we can do better, and the American police can certainly do better. But in terms of why your answer might be skewed thus is because I do know that police really do try hard to reach out in communities that they're embedded in, and so therefore the actual experience of the police might be a bit more positive if you have an embedded police force within the community. Not, however, perhaps if it's not embedded, that could be a bit different.
Yeah. I think, Indrani, we have done enough.
Oh, wow. We have really earned out no money.
We certainly have. We richly deserve that. Thank you very much, Peppers. I'll be seeing you guys real soon.